When I first met you, you were just coming out of a role in government. Something we share is the power of using government to work at scale. I know your work at the foundation has been to blend that passion, maybe bring passion to process, to really help implement the way you do things at the foundation so that you can get more effective work. So you tell me about, do you value process? It sounds boring, but is process important into doing the work well?
Yes, definitely processes are important because I think that when you are able to institutionalize some processes, then things can definitely improve. And I'm talking basically from a planning perspective, also from a strategic perspective. I think that having some process in place can definitely help achieve the goals that you have set. Because when I got into the foundation in 2016, I could see that there was this separation between this is what government does and this is what the philanthropic sector can support do governments. But I was thinking more about how can I help the philanthropic sector work together with governments and really understand that we all need to work together towards the same goals. And especially in issues like early childhood development, right? We cannot think about having impact at scale if we're not bringing all the different stakeholders into the table or into the conversation. But also understanding that if you want to reach scale, you need to work with governments because governments do have the possibility of reaching the largest targets, of universalizing services, of reaching the most vulnerable. So if you really wanted to achieve this goal of reaching scale, for me it was fundamental to try to bring this knowledge of how can we do better in our work with governments?
What's unique about you coming into philanthropy is you come from government. That doesn't always happen, someone from government into philanthropy. You and I have talked about the frustration that we hear from the private sector in philanthropy. Oh, government has so much to learn from these other sectors. But you say, actually, there are lots of things that philanthropy can learn from government. What are those?
Yes, I think that one of the things that I feel philanthropy can learn from government is this sense of urgency, which I don't necessarily feel all the time in philanthropy, right? Because probably, I mean, when you're working in government, everything's urgent. Everything has to be done for like yesterday. And because you have to give like an immediate response to citizens, and that's the main purpose of government and just like civil services as well, right? But I guess that when you're working in philanthropy, the timing is different. But I think that this sense of urgency is actually important because I think philanthropy has a very important strategic role in supporting governments, in collaborating with governments also react to many of these emergencies, right? And the humanitarian emergencies that we're living in at the moment, for example, does mean that philanthropy needs to be able to react in an immediate way because that's what we need to do now. Also, I think part of like working as a system, I think it's important because even though I still believe that many governments still work in silos, but at the end, governments do represent a system. And I think many times in the philanthropic sector, we can do more on understanding how to work systemically, how to work across sectors, how to work with different stakeholders and really make sure that the role of philanthropy can be complementary to what others can do. It's interesting because many times philanthropy can feel we're big enough to save the world. But the way I see it is like we all need to collaborate together if we want to save the world. So it's not the role of one stakeholder or the other. It's actually the role that we all have together in order to contribute to a specific mission or purpose. And in the case of early childhood development, I definitely think that we could have so much more impact if we could truly work together. And there are different examples that I think have worked on things that we actually do. So just to mention, for example, the executive courses that we're currently doing with the Bernard Valier Foundation, and there's one particularly the last executive course that we're doing with London School of Economics. What we tried to do there was like bring all the knowledge that we develop with different global technical partnerships. So we're bringing the knowledge of very different stakeholders. We're using the platform of academia. And then we're inviting like different teams from different local governments to join these courses. So if you think there, you're basically promoting the collaboration between philanthropy, because we're funding this project. Then you're bringing all the technical expertise of different global partners that are bringing all of this amazing knowledge that they have been able to develop through these years. Then you have academia that has this great platform to expand and to spread the knowledge that they have. And then you have the local participants, which represent the public services in different cities. So for me, this ecosystem is like the perfect example of how you can bring many different stakeholders to then test different ways of implementing things, implementing solutions, and reaching this impact we talk about.
So structures, meetings, the way of working is as important as actually the goals themselves. I know you've made some changes at the foundations around process and the way things are done. Tell me a little bit more about that and what you think the legacy of that will be within the work.
The collaborative way of working, and I think for me this has been quite important, and it comes to basic things such as like creating reports, right? I really like the fact that you can work as a team in order to produce a report to the board, or in order to produce an Early Childhood Matters publication. Like, bring in as many people as possible to basically reflect on what we're doing in order to inform others. And for me, this is quite different from the way that I've seen things done in the past or in other organizations. Because this is not necessarily like a shared responsibility. These are more like very individual responsibilities. Well, I think there's a lot of added value on like bringing people together to produce specific outputs.
It's a lot more fun that way usually as well.
It's also fun. Like another example, for example, is all the convenings that we have been organizing. And you know about this because you used to support us, like run many of our convenings. And then we decided, why don't we try doing this in-house? Like we have the capacities, we have the skills, and we have the team that can come together in order to deliver specific convenings. And I think we've had a lot of fun. I think this is one of the moments that I can say that even during the pandemic times, brought the full team together. And it's also amazing to see all the different skills that you can bring from organizing something together. I think one way that we have innovated the way that we work, I think it's the operational model that we currently have allows us to be a foundation that is not only distributing grants, but it's actually also learning from the process of implementation. Mm-hmm. And I think this makes the Bernard Van Leer Foundation quite unique. And I think it's because it's the fact that we deliver the grants, we kind of like give technical assistance either through our own team and the capacities that we have in-house, but many times we also connect the implementation of projects to global technical assistance or local technical assistance that can contribute to specific purpose. But for me, the most important part of this is that after the implementation, we're always kind of like gathering which are the important learnings and reflections that can then generate this very specific knowledge that we share with the rest of the world and that we kind of like share back with the final users, if you wish. So for me, this loop of learning and reflecting is very important. I think this has been quite innovative on the way that philanthropy can work.
I'd love to then move to sort of pulling off these lessons, the people that you've worked with. Foundations aren't anything usually without their grantees. They find partners to support philanthropically or to bring together. Who have you worked with that's just been, wow, I've learned so much, this partnership was really successful, we should be doing even more of this, both individuals and organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think very lucky and I'm grateful. I would say that I do think that this experience of working for a global organization has enabled to meet and connect to many different people and organizations, because at the end, the changes depend on people. So for me, like empowering these leaders that are really willing to support these changes is very important. No? So I would start like people like you, like Lisa. Mm-hmm. You're always been supportive of just taking some of the lessons that we can have as a foundation and finding ways to also kind of like channel and communicate some of these learnings with others, and especially with your own platform. I think this can be like a successful experience on how we can connect and kind of like just amplify the impact of what we can do. But I want to say that I feel very lucky of having met many powerful women. So I do want to highlight that, because I think, and I would talk about a couple of them. I think every partner we've worked with has been amazing, because we have been able to achieve impressive outcomes. But just to mention a couple of people that I do feel in my very personal experience are making the difference are, for example, Skye Duncan with the GDCI. She works on trying to change the way that we use streets. And I think this particular topic has been very close to the work that we do, is just thinking about streets in a complete different way. So I remember meeting Skye and her asking me, define me what a street is. And I was shocked with this question. And then I could see that I was immediately relating to a street with cars. And in reality, when you think about a street, you're thinking about the largest open public space in any city. Mm-hmm. So why can't we take streets back to people? Mm-hmm. And I think what has been really interesting about also leading the organization during pandemic times is that concepts like this actually became an opportunity, because we suddenly realized how important public space is, and we suddenly started doing things to recuperate this public space. Another colleague that I admire because of the work that she's been doing around design is Selva. She's from Turkey, and she's been doing amazing work on trying to rethink on the design of parks and playgrounds. Many other women, but just to mention, I was able to meet through our Early Childhood Matters publication. We were able to have Michelle Bachelet or Helen Clark, which are two political women that I admire a lot. This is not from now. I think this is from previous that I joined the foundation. I was able to meet Michelle Bachelet in my previous work. But just the fact that they're still linked to the early childhood field has been very important and inspiring for me, because this does mean that there's an opportunity to keep early childhood development in top of the political agenda, and this is very important.
What is the role of data at BVLF?
So data is fundamental, and I think maybe this is also something I bring from government, because of course there's no way you can make good policy without good data. And I think likewise, when you're working in the organization, you want to make sure that you have good data to monitor projects, good data to tell your stories, good data in order to document and create reports that people feel identify with, good data that it's scanning innovation around the world. So I definitely think that there's so much room for improvement on the way that we collect reliable data, but also on what we do with data. I remember the specific case of Lima that for some reason, when they started observing the public life, they realized there weren't any babies. So basically all the measures of the pandemic were basically forbidding babies and families to be on the public space. And this became like a concern. And I think that the fact that we were able to develop this like mini reports that were then delivered to the mayor allowed us to take immediate action.
So one of the things I know the foundation has done, because I've been lucky enough to partner, is to think about how to make systemic change, as the way you're talking about, through multiple stakeholders, packaged around something that everyone can get their head around, which is Urban 95. So looking at 95 centimeters as the average height of a 3-year-old. And you also help people experience who may not be in early childhood, who may not be parents or spend time with little kids. I remember giving empty strollers to people through LA to experience what it's like, or having them carry a bag of rice. So really creating these experiences for people. So I'd love to hear, in this approach you've taken, Urban 95 wasn't just about kids, it was really about the whole system. What have you learned in framing a topic like early childhood, which can be very narrow, into this whole system of an urban setting? It's a great initiative. So what have you learned, and has it worked?
Yes, I think Urban 95 has been one of my favorite parts of work. And I think part of it has to do with this idea that early childhood development is not only related to social policies, it has to relate to urban policies, it has to relate to development policies. And I think we were really good in framing Urban 95, because it really immediately gives a perspective and and this idea that you're thinking from a perspective of a 3-year-old child. And I think everybody that just like starts thinking about that, because they basically either like kneel on their knees and just like start thinking, what happens if I start seeing the world from this perspective? And this immediately triggers something different. But for me, what has been really interesting about the work with cities is really understanding how many opportunities we have from an urban planning or urban design perspective to really transform the life of people.
Just one more ecosystem or systems approach I'd love for you to talk about. I never thought when I hear an organization working on early childhood that they would work on climate. That seems, of course, kids are in the society and it will impact it, but I'd love to hear your approach. I know you've worked on climate. I'd love to hear that you bring the systems approach, this multi-stakeholder approach. How has that played out in climate change within the foundation?
I think one of the things that has been very powerful, actually, in 2021, we did a lot of work and efforts on bringing the climate lens into the early childhood field. And for me, it's been like impressive to see all the work that we can do. And the first thing I must say is that many times when you talk with the climate change stakeholders, they're not necessarily talking about the people itself. They're talking about the climate effects. They're talking about all this like very technical terms and effects of what's happening. But we kind of like put people out of the story. And I think that if you bring people into the story, and especially if you bring babies and young children, which are the future of humanity, then the story becomes a lot stronger because we feel part of the story. So if we're talking about ensuring a good start for all children, we can not only think about the basic services that children need to access immediately, we need to think about the environment where children are growing. So I definitely think that climate and children are so linked.
You worked with cities on the border of Venezuela, Brazil, Colombia, so you would see these refugees coming in. We're facing another wave of refugees. I'm just curious what you've learned about early childhood, Urban 95, and refugees. I'm sure when the foundation set out, I don't know if it thought it would be in the refugee world. We have more and more refugees every day. Is there lessons on bringing all this together around refugees?
I think many lessons, especially at a city level, because if you think about a humanitarian crisis, you're thinking, who is facing the fact that you have all this amount of people arriving to your city, and how are you able to cope with the demands and requests that families have, but especially families with very young children. And this is exactly what we're seeing with the current crisis as well, right? Like we have all these young children who are forced to leave their country. And for me, just like triggering at a city level, what are the best responses to what we can do towards protecting these young children from trauma, from actually ensuring that they can actually have a good start despite the conflict they might be living is fundamental. Teresa Zurita, who was the mayor of the time when she had all this large number of Venezuelan families reaching her city, I thought it was amazing to see this leader just like open the doors of all of her social services to Venezuelan families and basically host them in a way that they felt welcome. And for me, this example of what a mayor can do, just because they have the will to do it, but also understanding that the main people they needed to protect were women and young children because they were the most vulnerable, can make the whole difference in this kind of situation. And we've written case studies about these experiences because I think this is also very important. When you see something can be effective, how can you document this so this can inform and inspire others? So we have also been very careful during these years on really making sure that whatever good practice or successful experience or whatever that has been tested, because sometimes some of these experiences can also not work, how can we document this so this can also help others?
I want to go back to your leadership. You took over as executive director in 2019, and at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, this little thing that we're now in the middle of, we're not wearing masks, but COVID happened, and COVID impacts everyone. And I'm curious how that impacted your organization and what leadership you had to exhibit to support the work in new ways. So much of what you did before was convening, bringing people together. That couldn't happen. So how did you change your partnership strategy during COVID, and what leadership attributes did you have to tap in yourself?
We needed to adapt quickly to all the changes that we were having. And I think we did quite well in the organization. We were ready to cope with technological issues, for example. So from that perspective, it was quite easy to decentralize a lot of the work just because we were ready to face that. I think at the time we had just decided to decentralize many of our teams working at a country level, which was actually a really, I think it was a decision that was made on time without expecting to have a pandemic, but thanks God that we actually had these teams on the ground, because I think that we could continue working just because we had the teams on the ground. I think from a management perspective, it was of course challenging because I felt I needed to keep things going, and just relating to what I was saying before, also because the pandemic was demanding or requesting like a fast response to what was happening. So at the beginning, we just decided, okay, we want to make sure that we're giving like reliable information and how can parents deal with basically supporting their youngest children during this pandemic time. So we were trying to gather like all the materials that we could in order to make sure that people could access reliable material in a quick time and in a fast way, in a reliable way as well. I think the other interesting thing is that I do think that the pandemic enabled to organize all these online events, and we just took advantage of that to actually use these platforms to expand the impact of some of the learnings and the knowledge that we have been able to develop through these years. And that was actually like a great opportunity, because I cannot think of any other moment in history where we have been as inclusive as we are now. And I feel, again, very proud of the teamwork that we did in order to collaborate for these common goals.
Okay, so you've just climbed to the top of the highest peak you can for little kids. You're looking out at the vista. What's the future of early childhood? But maybe what you think it is and or what you want it to be.
Yeah, I mean, for me, early childhood development will always be one of the most important things to work in, just because we're talking about the foundation of every society. And I mean, I'm always aware of the economic return you can get by investing in early childhood development, but for me, I'm more interested in the social return we can get from investing in early childhood development. So that would be my main goal in the future, is hoping that many more stakeholders will continue to invest and see the importance of investing in the early years. I am concerned, of course, because of the current crisis that we have at a global level, that a lot of the budget that was defined for early childhood matters starts switching to other priorities, and this can become a risk in order to sustain these foundations. So I really hope that we can do some strong advocacy towards protecting that, because I think it's important. I also hope that we can keep thinking about this holistic way of seeing early childhood development, right? I think, and one of my big learnings of working in the Bernard Banlier Foundation, you cannot just think of early childhood development by ensuring the basic services that are related to health, education, social welfare, and nutrition. You gotta understand what's happening around the children, what's happening with the families that sustain these children. And only then you will be able to really help children thrive. I think for the future, we're going to have to do a lot more on the mental health of caregivers and young children, because I think this is something that might become like a new pandemic, and then some people have already been like talking about this, but I honestly think that because of many things that humanity is going through right now, this will become a topic. Again, I think we still have to work so much on being more inclusive, because it's not just about being diverse. It's not just about inviting everybody to dance or to the party. It's because there's this beautiful paper I read about that it talks about, like, you know, many times we can invite everybody to the party. So we have a very diverse party with people coming from all over the world, which makes it very multicultural and very pluralist in many different ways. But once that the party starts, not everybody gets invited to dance. And for me, it's like, how can we make, and this for me, again, this is a metaphor I like using, because I want to make sure that we're inviting everybody to dance, to make the decisions, to decide what kind of music they want to play. And I think we still have a lot of work to do towards that, towards really working on an inclusive world where we're really listening to diversity of thoughts, to diversity of cosmovisions, to diversity of ways of being and working. And we're not there yet.
To ending on inviting more people to the party and making sure we all dance together. So, Ceci, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. And we have to go dancing.
We will.